Yeah. In many different economies, the most important consideration that they have are the money supply. And in the money supply, what they're talking about is how they introduce more money into the system so that they can get more transactions, which are more transfers, more charges, more money. But on the other hand, the issue of inflation is one of the biggest issues that any economy, society, country, place, continent, world has to deal with, because inflation actually directs the value of the money, and it actually determines the value of the purchasing power. So all of the inflation in the world is determined by the money supply, and also it actually encourages the different values of commodities and of goods. So what inflation is a sustained growth in the price of the commodities that people have to buy. So when something increases in a shop and then it's one item, this is not considered to be inflation. But when a large variety of items is inflated or grows in value, then this is what we actually call inflation, when the whole basket of goods and services is actually growing. So the key to understanding inflation is to know that all the things that are in an economy or in a society are determined by the money supply. So the more money that is supplied in an economy, the less value that money actually has. So when we have inflation, we have a devaluation of the money, and then we have a growth in the money supply. So the money supply is determined by the central bank. So the central bank directs inflation by creating what they call an inflation target. So this happens in most countries in the world, and in any central bank, what they're supposed to do is to create employment and to control the prices. Prices are inflation. So there are different types of inflation that they are actually monitoring. But the most important aspects of inflation are that they are in two forms. So there is consumer inflation, which is measured in an index called the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. And then there is business inflation, which is measured in the index called the PPI. Okay, so when we're talking about consumer inflation, what we're talking about is the growth in goods and services. So the goods are in their own category, and then the services are in their own category. And when you look at these inflation indexes, you're going to see that there is a CPI X and a CPI core. So the CPI core take the CPI core actually just calculates the inflation of the consumer price index of all of the things in the economy except for gas and fuel and food. So it doesn't include food and gas, because these items are really volatile because they're affected by the supply and demand, the seasons, and things like that. So when you look at the CPI index, you're going to see that there are going to be two different indexes. So there's going to be the CPI including food and energy, and then there's going to be the CPI excluding food and energy. There's going to be a PPI including and excluding. So what you're going to be looking at are both of them, because you're gonna have to know what is happening in both of them for you to get a bigger picture, and then for you to know where the volatility is coming from. So when you're investing, trading, or doing business, what you actually have to account for is the volatility. The volatility is the volume, is the voltage, is the violence. So when you have an idea of what the volatility is doing, then you have a good idea of what you should do in order to create value. So in all of the food items and in all of the purchasing managers indexes, you're gonna see that all of the inflation is accounted for in those terms. So when you're looking at inflation, there are two types of inflation that you should consider. So first of all, there's price inflation, where the price of goods are skyrocketing. And the second type of inflation is that there's monetary inflation, where the money supply is expanding. So in our economy and according to our system, this system actually craves for inflation. It needs inflation. So our inflation rate in different countries is different depending on the economy, depending on various factors. But what you discover is that every country has inflation, and some countries more than others. But let's take the American economy as an example, because this is the world economy, right? So in the American economy, the Reserve Bank desires an inflation rate of about 2%. So it means that you are able to predict inflation by knowing the desires of the central bank. So when they want an inflation rate of 2% and their inflation rate is at 2.5%, you know that they're going to take measures to reduce the rate of inflation. So the way that they do this is by adding or withdrawing money supply, is by operating in open market operations, second thing, or by bank reserves. That's the third thing. So all of these things could also be a hybrid, or be different in a certain sense, way that they could decide to be more creative in using all of these financial tools, and they call them tools. So when you have the understanding that the whole inflationary system is desirable, you know that inflation is actually desirable. Actually, they don't want deflation. They don't want prices to stay the same. And this is what improves growth and increases the GDP. So when they have a growing inflation, what they're doing is creating a bubble. Okay? So when you have a pump, what you're doing is you're inflating with it, and then what you inflate is a bubble. This is why we use the word bubble in finance, because that is what inflation is meant to do. But the only thing is the bubble shouldn't pop. But fiat currency creates this bubble, because with a fiat currency, what you face is that the money supply or monetary inflation is constant, price inflation is constant, so growth is constant. So in order for us to challenge inflation, or in order for us to manage inflation, or the actual model that is working is that inflation is supposed to go hand in hand with what we call all right, great. Inflation is supposed to go hand in hand with what we call production. So inflation is an increase in money supply that is not matched by the productivity. So the most important thing to monitor is the productivity, which is the GDP. And there are different types of GDPs, gross domestic products. So inflation is supposed to go hand in hand with how people are actually producing goods and services in an economy. So what I just went through is inflation, the different types of inflation, what causes it, what stops it, and what are the consequences. So every crash is because of the bubble that bursts. Okay, so inflation, prices, and production is very important to understand in order to get the big picture of what you're supposed to actually look for in any economy. Because by any measurement, any economy is looking for inflation, but it's looking for that optimum balance so that it can just go on this steady trajectory, you know. So not stagflation, not zero inflation, not deflation, but they just want a steady rate of inflation. And through that, they have what they call growth, because the bubble is growing. The bubble is getting bigger, and that's growth. So I hope that you can just check out some of the links below for some of the things that could be related to your field and finance. If you like art, music, and stuff like that, just check them out. So thanks a lot for watching.